But you're bypassing the stairs. Where you going? You gotta go where we're going. You know, now you're looking funny. Why don't you just go where we're going? Yeah, exactly. Okay. Can you stop holding that shit like that?
Okay, it's filming now.
Can you try to come here? Like, it should be like in front. How does that look?
Oh, we're in the sun, but we can see you. While you're squinting really hard and sun is in your face.
Okay, so we can start. How does that look? Can I just see how it looks when I'm talking about it? And dude, how I want this to be is it's supposed to be casual. But
Dress casual.
and we're using my phone for a mic. So like it's just... What are you doing?
I said I should lean on it. I'm leaning on it.
Say something.
Check out my big black bag.
What's up, man? How you doing? This is one of those things we're just trying out the camera. So I recently just launched my Medium, and Medium is where I write my short articles that will eventually lead to Open, the book. So I decided to call this Cafeteria Science because the articles that are there are purely opinion-based science writings. They are not, they don't have an authority of sorts, meaning that just goes to show that we're no lecturers and we're no astrophysicists or evolutionary biologists, but we're just people trying to propagate a love for science and philosophy in our country, especially in a country like ours. The entropy is a principle or a law that is clocked into the second law of thermodynamics, and what it talks about is that at best the definition can simply be summed up as the disorderedness of a particular system or a state. It's a measure of disorder of a particular system or a state. So it's basically, at its most, a measure of disorder. Just like we have a basic definition of, say, what an atom is, a basic unit of matter. So entropy as well, we can sum it up by simply saying that it's a measure of disorder. So what that simply means to say is, you see, when I can give you an illustration that comes from the scientist Richard Feynman. He was giving a lecture about entropy, one of his 1990s lectures. I don't remember when exactly. So he talked about how entropy has this nature of having things only move in one direction. So for example, the way things progress into a certain state cannot be reversed. I'll give you an example of if you have a scrambled egg drops to the floor. There are very lower chances that in nature that egg would unscramble itself and form into an egg. Things tend to go one way. Or if you have an ice cube, although for an ice cube it's arguable because you could freeze the ice cube, but you can't freeze it to its original state it was in before it melted, you know. Or another example could be the same one Richard Feynman gave, where he said if he's speaking to a crowd, talking to them, lecturing them, there's no point at which his voice will flow back into his mouth when he opens his mouth immediately after saying the last sentence. Things always tend to go in one direction. There's like a one-directionalness into things, and this one-directionalness is like a gradual degradation into disorder. Even the universe, if we're trying to make it a little more complicated, when it was starting off, it had low entropy, and then as it progressed after, say, inflation, and it started speeding on, it had high entropy, and it kept on having high entropy. So like
it's a decline into disorder.
Yes, like the way I've said it moves, you move, it's a measure of how disordered a particular state is.
Yeah, exactly.
So say for example, you're moving from a very organized state into a disorganized state. We can say that state you're moving into, which is overly disorganized, has high entropy.
Okay, then if you watch the movie Tenet,
No, I haven't seen the movie Tenet.
Okay, in the movie Tenet, they had time travel. So in time, what they were saying, of course, it's just a movie, but what they were saying is they were using reverse entropy.
Yes.
In order to travel back in time.
So they were like reversing the level of disorder to a more orderly state.
Yeah, they were using some technology to reverse entropy so that they could go backwards in time.
Okay.
So in their minds, they're going forwards, but they're going backwards. But for them, it's like they're going forwards, but it's actually backwards. Okay, so that's pretty interesting.
And sorry to
So
cut
that's
you
what
short.
entropy is.
Sorry to cut you short. And I think the logic or the rationale they were trying to use is pretty easy to wrap your mind around, because like we said, like when the universe was just starting off, it had very low entropy. And then when it progressed, it had high entropy. So if these guys are going back into time, then obviously I don't know why they want to go into a more ordered state for them to go back into time, or reversing entropy.
No, they were just reversing entropy. They're using some advanced technology. But then that means if the law of entropy is a law and it works out, we know that even when something is disordered,
Yeah.
and that thing will probably never occur again, given enough time, it can always go back to the state it was at a certain point, because it's constantly just experiencing disorder randomly.
Yeah.
But even though it's random, it's so random that eventually it finds itself back at the same point given enough time.
So
The way it was before, if given enough time, it will find itself there again.
well, that would be highly unusual, because what we
No,
know.
it's part of the physics studies. Where, say, for example, if you have a messy room, the example that I like giving is the messy room.
Yeah.
And then it's messy in such a way, like your shorts are like this, and it's this pair of shorts, and your clock is like this, your bed sheets are like this. You know, it's just a mess. Given enough time, if you live in that room, eventually that same order of things, that same messiness, that pattern of messiness will repeat itself, because you're experiencing all the patterns of messiness given enough time. Since you're the same person and you have the same habits, given enough time, that same room will appear again
In an orderly state.
the way it was when
In
you
a
found
messy state.
Yeah, but that order of messiness
Yeah,
will
it's like
appear
it's
again.
exactly like what the second law of thermodynamics tries to get to, because it says it's either a state will remain constant, or it's gonna progress towards disorder. There's only like one way to go.
No, but
It
entropy
is-
is remaining constant. It's just that it's experiencing a similar pattern it did before.
Okay, so it doesn't progress into more disorder.
No.
So you could say it's constant entropy, not high.
It's
not
constantly
high or low
experiencing
entropy.
disorder, but now you say, like, what has happened this time? The chances of it occurring again is 1,000,000 maybe to 1.
Okay.
So meaning, given enough time,
Yeah.
what you found in that particular pattern will repeat again.
Okay. So what you're
I don't know if you
arguing.
understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think I get
Yeah.
the central point. So what you're saying is, we cannot say entropy has progressed into any state whatsoever if simply a messy state is just like repeating itself through a circle.
No,
Like,
it's like, say, for
isn't that
example-
what you're saying?
No, it's like, say, for example.
You give an example of a room. It's disordered.
Yes.
But you're saying in some weird way.
disordered it in a specific pattern. Like,
And the
you
pattern
have
will
this
remain
pair
constant.
of shorts maybe hanging over the bed like this.
Yes.
You have the blankets, and the blankets are messed up in a particular way like this.
Yeah, but they can't unravel themselves. Or
No,
like,
as in, like, now to find the room in like that, exactly like that, like the same pair of pants again,
highly
the
impossible.
same sheets
Yes.
twisted in the same way again.
it's
You know,
it's
the
highly
same pair
impossible.
of underwear on the same place on the floor again.
Yeah,
Like, to find that pattern in the exact order again,
it's highly impossible.
it's highly unlikely. But given enough time,
Yes.
eventually, that exact same pattern can occur.
Okay, but I think that's still debatable. Cause
No, it's one of the theories, but it involves entropy and the
Okay.
law of thermodynamics, where you say,
Okay.
like, something, as much as it's the, like, when you say, like, the possibilities, like the outcomes of a particular thing, there are many different outcomes,
yeah.
but the same chance of the same outcome happening twice is
Yeah.
highly unlikely. But given enough time, it can happen again.
Oh, okay.
That's one of the theories, because of how things are only flowing in one direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't go backwards, but
Yeah.
they can go backwards in the sense that they go forward so much that it finds itself again.
Yeah.
A lot of theories that are being thrown around.
Yeah, because
It's
I'm
a
just
lot.
trying to make sense of what you're saying. Because initially, I read an article on Lumen, some online website where this is highly talked about, where they gave an illustration of a room, like a messy room. So the room, the example was that a typical example of how entropy tends to increase or stay constant is a messy room. If a room is messed up, the clothes are everywhere, your shoes are everywhere, there are higher chances that it will stay messed up or get worse. So you could have dust flowing in from the windowsill, you could have wind blowing stuff altogether. It can never reverse into an ordered state. No matter what happens, it can only go one way, which is like slightly get more worse or disordered or remain the way it is. It's highly unlikely that it could like reverse itself into an ordered room.
What I was talking about, like say for example, if you put different colors, let's say of color pens, and you put them in a container, and then you throw them out at once, then they all land. And then you do it again. They won't land like in that exact same position.
Yes, and then before you throw them out, they have low entropy. When you throw them on the floor,
yes, but now my point is, if you keep on doing it, eventually, even if it takes 1,000,000 times, eventually they'll fall in the order they fell in the first time.
That's highly improbable, but probably could happen.
Because if you just keep trying and keep doing it, eventually.
And even when we talk, I forgot to flood out some overtones. When you talk about entropy being one directional, that's really overstating the case. It's like being too cocksure. We could just work with probability. We could say entropy works best with probability. So it's more probable that it will move one way. Things will always progress into one direction, like that band. Yeah, but it's not a fact. We could be shocked someday and stuff just won't happen the same way they do,
Okay, but if you like gambling, you might want to study entropy.
Isaac Newton.
Okay, Isaac Newton, I think we need to argue what was going on with Isaac Newton. He was probably high. On a ladder. A ladder.
And he was like...
He was high on a ladder, and then he was wondering, why do people fall?
Exactly. Yeah, and that Apple story, like people, it's what people are usually familiar with. Every time when you talk to somebody or ask somebody who they think Isaac Newton is,
he was Adam, right? Sitting under the tree of life, and then the fruit fell on his head. And he was like, what?
That story is apocryphal, man. It's
and then he just got distorted with time.
It's okay. There's truth to it, and there's also untruth to it. Like he was sitting in his family, like orchard of sorts. Like
okay, but have you seen pictures of Isaac Newton?
Yeah, it's like
he came from that time when men were weird.
Well, how so?
Okay, they used to wear really tight stockings, put on white wigs and stuff, and then they would put white powder on their faces and even put red lipstick on, and then get I don't know what that thing was, and they would stick it, look like a big mole on the side. And you're that's the time that Isaac Newton.
Okay.
That's the time he comes from.
I think that's a really precise description of how the general guy looked in those days.
Because in Africa, I don't think that's what people look like at the time.
Yeah. We weren't looking like that. I think in Africa we look more like closer to our primate cousins.
Yeah, Africa and the East, like in China, people didn't really dress like that. But
China, though, they had their painted faces.
That's what a good-looking guy looked like.
When Newton saw the apple fall in his head, something really important happened. So he wondered, why can't... We were talking about reverse and things going back into reverse. When you push something, it goes back. So he was wondering, why hasn't the apple fallen upwards? Why do things always fall down? What is happening? And if the apple is falling down, he asked the most important question of all. Why isn't the moon falling down? Why isn't the moon falling the same way the apple is falling? He came up with this idea that the same force that's making the apple fall is the same force that's holding the moon in its position. And that we came to know as the universal law of gravity, or the universal gravitational force. Don't know if I'm saying it right. But yeah, just that. So the idea behind the apple falling is really something that led us into very deep understandings of gravity that set physics off into a very cool place. And Newton was making all these discoveries on the backbone of very important science in his age. This was just after Galileo lived, Nicholas Copernicus, and this was way after the heliocentric model of the universe was accepted as the actual model of the universe. This was that time. So Isaac Newton was basically on the backbone of some good science, and he made it better. He explained things in a light that nobody else did, and that's recommendable. Wouldn't you agree?
No, of course. And I know that this stuff can be boring, but the whole idea is to try and understand the existence that we live in. So, Isaac Newton did a lot of stuff for modern day science. However, modern day science is also doing a lot for us today. People are actually challenging the theory of gravity because there's certain inconsistencies. Like, it doesn't make sense in every single like scenario and situation. So people are now talking about this theory of displacement.
Yeah, okay.
It's a small group, yes, but they're talking about this theory of displacement that when something is heavier than something else, then it falls. But if it's not heavier, it won't fall. So it's not necessarily to do with gravity, it's more to do with displacement.
And mass.
How much can something displace something? Because the more it can displace it, the less likely it is to fall. That's why huge, heavy boats, like yachts, even triple-decker yachts, are able to float on the water because it's all about ensuring that that mass can displace enough water so that it doesn't sink.
Okay, and that reminds me of Galileo's experiment with falling objects. He said if you drop two objects in a vacuum, two objects that we would presuppose one heavy object and another object that in normal circumstances would be light. Say for example a huge metal ball and a tiny marble or a feather to make it fun. So if you drop them in a space where there's no wind reaction, wind pressure and stuff like that,
Wind resistance.
in a vacuum, in short, they'll fall at the same time. It's weird, and it's very counterintuitive, but that kind of like links to what he's trying to say. The thing that is weird, that's the most weird, is who just sits down and go like, what is white light comprising of? Like, you know what I mean? It just doesn't make any sense.
So I'm just saying, please keep in mind that Isaac Newton was high on a ladder. Most likely when he came up with a lot of this stuff. He was high on a ladder. But you can finish what you were saying.
Yeah, so I was just saying it was weird how he just went and just thought up this stuff. Like, who just starts thinking, how do we see color? How is it that objects light up a certain way when you do this stuff? And then he discovered that when you split white light, it lets out all these 7 colors of the spectrum, like a rainbow.
But we don't know what was surrounding Isaac Newton, where else he may have gained inspiration from. That isn't very well recorded in history until you actually go back to the time in history and try to find other people that were researchers at the time.
Yeah.
It's very likely that people that are big figures in our time today, that we look at as big figures like Tesla, Einstein, and these other guys, actually got inspiration from a lot of other people that were also doing their own research.
Obviously, there is like text and records that can show us that perhaps he might have gotten most of his inspiration from. I mean, he even had a bitter argument with Robert Hooke.
Yeah.
That Robert Hooke claimed like you got some of my ideas, man. I mean, I was the first person that proposed that idea, and you just went and now
these guys are just the guys that became popular, that became endorsed.
Yeah.
But there were actually like a lot of people doing all this kinds of stuff. So that's kind of like why even today, for there to be any breakthroughs in anything, more people need to jump on it. And then it will push that whole agenda more and more and more.
Yeah.
But what I would actually like to close on is that whole thing about the vacuum, how things fall at the same time in the vacuum. But in a vacuum, there's also no temperature or anything.
Yeah.
And then one of the biggest vacuums we have today, and they say a vacuum is the best insulator, right? Yeah, so that's the biggest vacuum we have today is space.
Yeah.
But now the argument is, if space is a vacuum with zero, like very, very cold temperatures, how is it that if the sun is millions of miles away, its heat is still able to reach us when it's traveling through a vacuum? So I just want to end on that and let people go think about it.
All right. We'll check you out later, and we'll just check you out later.